guys, it's Nora, and I'm back today with Jacob so that we can talk about a health journey that Jacob has really been on for the past 4 or so years, kind of ish, 4 to 6, really since I've been dating you. And I'm here to share his 4 going on 5 new diagnoses that we did not know about. And I'm mostly going to be the one talking and sharing the story, and he will just like interject when he wants or make any like extra comments, because it's just easier if I tell the story and it's easier to like get through and explain things logically in like more of a timeline order. So the first one that we are going to talk about is kind of like is important, but is not super important. We're not really going to go over it that much. But the first one that's not like theoretically timeline wise makes sense, but it's kind of in the middle of there, is that Jacob actually has a perfusion disorder with his toes. And the way we figured this out was that Jacob's feet always looked like he had a fungal infection, and he is a runner. So I was like, Jacob, your toes specifically are always like super red. You should really ask your doctor about it. Turns out he has something called chilblains. It's just a perfusion disorder, and it affects, like I said, his toes. And pretty much if he's just in any like cold weather or climate or like skiing or snowboarding, he just needs to wear proper socks and make sure that he's not like cutting off the circulation to his toes. They're just at more risk of being damaged in the tissue, essentially. I think it's wool socks he's supposed to use, and they just recommend that he like wear socks all the time, even at home, versus not wearing them. But again, that one's a small one, not super affecting of anything else in his life, and that one is the one that we were just going to get out of the way first because it's not relevant to the other ones. The other ones all kind of like go together and like coincide with each other, and those are the ones we're going to focus on today. The second big diagnosis was one that I pushed for Jacob to get after we really started living together in 2020. However, it was something that I'd noticed since we started dating. Anyone who knows Jacob knows that the way he socializes isn't normal, in a sense of he does a lot of stuttering conversations. He struggles to know when to interject in conversations. A lot of like little things that I started noticing socially was like the first beginning part of pushing him to get this diagnosis. And that has been like since dating him, it was not an issue. He's much better with people who he is comfortable with and knows, and doesn't really do it as much when him and I are just like alone together. And then once we did live together for a summer between our junior and senior year of college, which we met in the beginning of junior year. But that summer was like such a quick rush that there weren't that many things, like we were constantly working, so there weren't that many things that I picked up on. It was still more of like all the social issues that I noticed. And also Jacob went to private school as a kid, so I think this diagnosis would have been picked up had he been in regular school. But since he did well academically and that was never an issue, no one ever questioned him having any diagnoses, even though socially your teacher probably saw it. They just didn't, they couldn't refer you to anybody because there was no services in that private school for him to even benefit from. So then we get to 2020 and we graduated college. I moved into his house and I started picking up a lot more specific mannerisms, traits, and such. And I really looked at him and was like, Jacob, I think you're autistic. Like, there's a lot. The diagnosis is not autism, but he presents very similarly with autistic traits, with socialization, with how he emotionally copes with things, with how he processing things, multiple different categories.
More so socially than anything else.
You're more outward with the social issues than the other ones. The other ones you have to like be around him a lot more to like pick up on, and how you like respond to things, like just with like emotions in everyday life, and how you like operate with like how you do tasks and clean things, and there's a lot to it. So eventually, after a lot of frustration, after a year of living together and me being like, what is going on? I was like, Jacob, you need to go get tested. I think you have autism, more for him to not only understand himself better, but also potentially get services. Like, he would qualify services if he did have that diagnosis. The other thing that we were looking for was maybe getting him to qualify for speech therapy in terms of like getting a job and stuff, because socially is where he struggles the most. So he went and got tested, and he does not have autism. But he does have something called social processing disorder. And the processing part, it's not just social processing. He struggles.
I think they more classified it as like a general communication with a
Yes.
focus on like
social.
not being able to process information and the
Yes.
social.
So the not just social part of it, but just the processing part of it, I pick up more like when he is driving, or like after he has a conversation, he will not remember a conversation with somebody that he's just had, because he's like so focused on like, when do I interject in the conversation appropriately? How do I not stutter in the conversation? How can I kind of relate to the same topic and keep the conversation going? So a lot of that sort of thing. However, the person who did test him did say that he potentially had autism as a kid, and he maybe just like assimilated into society because he needed to. And again, he didn't get services. He was in a private school, and he did really well socially or academically. So he might have had autism, and he might have just kind of learned to cope with it, and it just wasn't as like outwardly visible because he was also a quiet and shy kid. However, she also did say, and it literally says this in his like paperwork conclusion report, had he been tested by somebody else, he might have, instead of getting the social processing disorder diagnosis, he might have been diagnosed with autism. What does that mean for him? Really, as of right now, not that much. It's more important for like when you go to job interviews and stuff, for you to just let them know, like, this is why I talk the way I talk, because he kind of has some speech patterns. He can be very flat at times as well, especially with emotions. But it's more for him to understand why he communicates the way he communicates, how he, like, if something happens and it's frustrating to him, how he responds and how he processes that information. It just more helps him explain who he is as a human being. And if down the road he needed any kind of services, that would be there as well. The other big part of Jacob having this diagnosis does help him also understand socially why he struggled for years. I think you knew there was something different, you just never were able to like pick up on it, or you didn't know. And people in life are cruel, and socially you struggled in college and high school. And I think it kind of gave you, because it is considered a disability, it gave you more of a reason to be like, okay, like, I was struggling. Not that people were kinder to him because he was struggling, but it does give you...
It's more the, with, like, relationships with people was the social cues, and then also the not being able to tell if I was being made fun of or not.
Yeah, it more just, like, helped him be like, okay, there was something wrong with me, and that's why I struggled socially. However, also helping you understand that the people who your true friends and who they aren't. Because the people who are your true friends are really gonna understand that about you and still want to be friends with you and still communicate with you. On to diagnosis number 3, which kind of happened coincide with the autism diagnosis, but like, again, since we started dating, this has been a problem. Jacob has always had sleep problems, just to like clarify that. Even when he was like a little kid, he had sleep problems. And specifically, he always seemed like he was really tired. And honestly, more after like 2021, 2022, he started to snore way more, even though like I said, we'd lived together before, but we just saw an increase in his snoring. And then something that he had always done, especially in college, before he was like on any like mental health meds or anything, he started doing something that we refer to as sleep hallucinations, which they really aren't actually.
They're more dream enactments.
Yeah, dream reenactments, I think. I think not just enactment, I think reenactment. And this would essentially be, Jacob would have a dream and he was like acting out the dream. Now, this wasn't that big of a problem. Some examples is, like, before we started dating, he did, at one point, fall out of a bed because he was dreaming and got up and didn't realize it, and his bed was on risers in college. And then he used to think he was, like, seeing snakes, like, when he was dreaming and such. But it didn't really become an issue until we were sleeping in the same bed together. And he started waking me up, and I don't think he knew he was doing it as much, because when these things happen, like I said, Jacob thinks he's in a dream. When he opens his eyes and seems as if he is awake, but he is dreaming. and everything he sees around him, even with his eyes opened, is like the dream happening. But Jacob doesn't remember these episodes largely unless he is woken up by somebody. So he probably had a lot more of these before dating me and didn't know, and his roommate just slept through it. But turns out Jacob had started to have these much more frequently. They are very much stress-induced and lack of sleep-induced. And it wasn't an issue until Jacob started to become unsafe when he was having them. There were a few times where he put me at risk for being injured, and there was at one point where he did injure me. And so at that point when he injured me, I said, enough is enough. You need to go see somebody and figure this out, because these are getting out of control, they're happening more frequently, and such. He went to, initially, also because he was always tired and snoring a lot, they sent him to a pulmonologist. Once Jacob went to the pulmonologist, and again, they kind of blew him off, but once he brought up the fact that he had been violent, they were like, okay, this is probably maybe just like sleep apnea or something else is going on. We'll just send you to go get a sleep study, but we'll make it urgent because you're saying that you can be violent. Even though there had only been like one actual episode where I'd been injured, they were like, since he has this issue, we'll send him. And he got a sleep study within a week. And turns out, Jacob had sleep apnea, which was the third diagnosis. He has a type of obstructive, but it's not the type where it's like an anatomical issue, like it's not because he has extra weight on his neck or anything. His brain just forgets to tell him to breathe. It forgets to tell him to wake up. So when he got his CPAP machine, turns out he never felt fully rested. And he loves his CPAP machine. He uses that thing religiously. But then we went back to the pulmonologist because he was still doing these dream reenactments. And mind you, this kid had done these on nights that he'd taken melatonin and NyQuil. Like, he was sedated almost, practically, essentially. And he was still doing these dream reenactments. And those drugs were not helping, even though he still to this day has been told to take melatonin. So because the pulmonologist was like, well, you have sleep apnea, so just keep using your CPAP, and these episodes would probably just go away. It was probably just like a lack of oxygen to your brain, and these should just go away. Well, Jacob continued to snore with his CPAP, which they said was not supposed to be normal. Jacob also continued to have dream reenactments on his CPAP, except this time he's strapped into something. But he still is waking up and having these sleep hallucinations, is what they essentially look like. Because he will wake up and think he's seeing things. Like he said, like spiders, ticks, snakes, like he thinks they're around him. The other really popular one that he likes to do is he likes to reenact being at work. He works in his sleep. I told him he's not getting paid for it, but the man likes to work in his sleep, okay? He'll like pretend like he's typing something into the wall. He'll pretend like he's like driving his forklift. All sorts of things. So we went back after about 4 or 5 months. We went back to the pulmonologist and said, hey, he's still snoring. He's still dream enacting. And they said, that's not right. He shouldn't be snoring at all. And he had a really great mask fit, and they could see that from the data from his machine. So they said, okay, why don't you go back and do another sleep study? We'll do one with like more wires on his head. Because when you go, they still do kind of look at your brain, and they do a few wires. But the second one, way more wires on his head, the whole get up. Turns out, Jacob snored like 200 plus times that night. So they bumped up his pressure, because also if you do need an increased amount in pressure, which the sign would be you would continue to snore, they do have to retest you and see if your pressure needs to go up. So that sleep study did 2 things, because he also didn't do any dream reenactment during the first one, which we thought for sure he was gonna, because he was sleeping in a different place and it was stressful. So typically those things prompt him to have them, and he didn't. So during that second one, like I said, he snored, and he did have what they thought was some dream reenactment. However, it looked like, so sleep apnea was the third diagnosis, okay? So it looks like potentially on the readings from all of those wires that Jacob might have had a seizure. So yes, it looks as if, and I've seen EEGs before, and I've kind of seen like a very small amount of EEGs and what they look like when there is a seizure on them. They said it might have just been artifact. He might have just been like turning or moving a certain way, and it might just be an accidental finding, an accidental pickup, because Jacob does not have any other symptoms during the daytime of actually having any seizures. However, that is the 5th technically diagnosis that we're working on. So that one is not like a definite. However, they did say for sure, because he's still having these episodes, that he does have REM behavior sleep disorder, which essentially is almost like the opposite of sleep paralysis. So his brain is supposed to be sending either signals or hormones or like neurotransmitters or chemicals to tell his body to paralyze when it's in the REM stage of sleep. And there are times, because there are nights that you don't, to our knowledge, have these dream reenactments, there are times that his brain forgets to tell the other parts, hey, paralyze. And so when Jacob has dreams, especially nightmares, he is acting them out. So if it is a nightmare where the walls are closing in on him, he is acting out that dream. And he thinks he's like in the middle of it. And he still has muscle movement in regards to that dream. So it's essentially the opposite of sleep paralysis, where your body forgets to wake up your body, or your brain forgets to wake up your body. It is his brain forgets to tell his body to like paralyze and relax when he's sleeping. So that was the 4th diagnosis. However, the 5th one is like potentially epilepsy. We're not really sure. The REM behavior disorder also needs to be followed up with by a neurologist, because they said it can be related to things like narcolepsy and such. However, we have not been able to get into a neurologist at this point in time. That is kind of the diagnosis and the potential one that we are still working on. He was having trouble getting into the one locally. However, we're moving in 10 days, so what does it matter? We are going to go see one overseas and hopefully get some more follow-up with that. So thank you guys for watching. Those are all the diagnoses that we have had / are working on. We are hoping to get more follow-up once we are living in Sweden, because we kind of have hit the end of our timeline here in the US. However, it might also be cheaper for us to go see people for it over there. But that is pretty much it. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys found that interesting. If you guys have any questions, it's still some things that we are working on. We question whether the REM behavior disorder might have anything to do with the sleep apnea, which might also have to do with the autism, because people who are autistic, even though he doesn't have that diagnosis, if he truly was like diagnosed that as a kid, those people have a very high rate of also sleep disorders. So it might all be completely intertwined and we just don't know that. However, that's all we know for now. He did have a clear brain MRI that we do know, but we're thinking he needs to go see a neurologist, and he will probably have an EEG would be the next step. So yeah. So thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned to see if that ever happens, and we'll see you guys next time.